To introduce our speaker today, the 1974 discovery of the Lucy fossil in Ethiopia transformed our understanding of human evolution. Lucy, a fossil of Australopithecus afarensis, is among the most complete early hominin skeletons, offering vital insights into human walking upright on 2 feet. Her discovery confirmed that walking upright preceded large brain development, which challenged earlier assumptions. Lucy's impact really reaches beyond science. We've all heard of this through our education, captivating the public's imagination, and she remains an iconic fossil of human origins. Over the past 50 years, her fossil has driven significant research in paleontology and paleoanthropology. It is my pleasure today to introduce Dr. James Aronson to the New York State Museum. Dr. Aronson was invited to participate in the team that found the Lucy fossil in 1974. And just for everyone's knowledge, it is almost to the date. I think it was found on November 24th, 1974. Prior to that, joining that team, Dr. Aronson received his BA from Rice University and his MS and PhD from Caltech. His research centers on investigating the histories of tectonically active areas like the East African Rift, and in particular to this talk, to the Hadar fossil site in Ethiopia. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Aronson, where he will present his talk, Opportunities of Dating an Older Woman, Lucy and the Beginnings of Humankind, the Geology and Natural History of How She Lived and Died. Dr. Aronson.
It's fabulous that the museum has this skull of Lucy. And notice that what we actually found, and we actually as a single person, Don Johansson, found all the pieces, and within roughly a week and a half was able to piece it together. Whereas there are skulls and nothing else. Skull is quite robust in terms of being among the very rare hominids that is still rare, but that are typically found because of its robustness. And we'll be talking about the finds of Lucy. And you probably know how she got her name, that popular song that would play on our, I forgot the Walkman or something like that, was Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds by the Beatles. And Lucy was judged to be female from her pelvis, but turns out evidence that was not telltale, as Don Johansson thought right away. And also the pelvis was a little bit stretched out from deformation of deep burial before coming up to exposure where we were working in the Afar of Ethiopia. And in addition, because Lucy's skull, which only is about the same size as a chimpanzee, would not have required, let's say, 400 cc's of cranial volume compared to your, let's say, 1,500 cc's, somewhere between 1,400 and 1,600 perhaps, of cranial capacity. And there was no real difference except in proportion to size of the female pelvis and the male pelvis. But she turned out, sort of thank goodness, the next year to definitely be female. So Lucy stuck. So I maybe just temporarily keep her here. And some people ask questions, and I had no idea that Cat Morehouse and the people from the museum would have this model of Lucy herself. And to have it here is so amazing. Some people would ask several questions about Lucy. I would think one that comes immediately to your mind would, well, how old was she? She was only 3 feet tall. She was about this tall, maybe even a little smaller. And maybe she was just a child. And the answer is no. She was about, at least in human terms, which would be chimpanzee terms as well, she was about 20 years old. And the answer is right here. It's in the mandible, when we don't have the maxilla, that is the one that comes in from our skull, and top of our skull. And if you look at the mandible, all these teeth are, but the other thing I will point out is not all mammals, well, almost all mammals are bilaterally symmetrical, for the most part, for sure. And so if you have half, you actually have much more than half, because you can mirror image and find the other teeth that are missing on this side. And it turns out we have both of the wisdom teeth. But these teeth are badly worn. All of these teeth are badly worn, except for the wisdom teeth. And it's much more evident in this case in the actual fossil, and the teeth stand out very nicely. They're the hardest part of the bone. And the wisdom teeth are barely worn, and the rest of the teeth are worn down quite flat. So look at all the information that we get about Lucy. We get an idea that since her wisdom teeth have just erupted or so, and in human terms, she would be somewhere in the age of 18 to 22 or something like that. And we also get that the differential in the wear of the teeth between all the other molars and the wisdom teeth is the fact that she was obviously eating rough material that were grinding down her teeth. And she probably would have had trouble living a long time after 20 years old, maybe up into beyond 35 or 40, just on the basis of her teeth being worn down. And so you get a lot of information, as you can imagine, by looking at the bones. The other thing to note is we have very little of the skull. We do have the back. We have enough to sort of imagine and shaping it together and derive some notion of her cranial capacity, which, as I said, would have been chimpanzee size. And it's amazing what a strong amount of study does in taking a few bones and being able to reconstruct a lot of the aspects of the skull, including, for example, with the mandible, being able to match the maxilla to be able to kind of shape out the maxilla. Okay, let's see if I can get that back together. So, thank you, Kat, and thank you, the New York State Museum. It's a museum I've always admired. My brother used to be a professor of biochemistry at SUNY Albany, and I would come to Albany often, and because I was a professor at this time when the expedition took place to during those years, I would come to Albany to visit my brother. So he kept kind of up with what we were finding, and I kept up with Albany. And so it's nice to be back. So now, let's see how I do this. I hope I can figure this out. Okay, well, we're here. And up here is the find of the fossil from Indonesia, which is fairly recently, I'd say about 1995, remembering that Lucy was found in 1974. Can everybody hear me? Would you like me to talk louder? This is Homo floresiensis. And she's also, I'm not sure, but we know that, nicknamed the Hobbit. And she stood about Lucy's height. But this is Homo, the genus Homo. In fact, essentially Homo, close to Homo sapiens, but so small and an adult that she's got her own species. And from this island called Flores, one of the many islands, small islands off Indonesia, which, by the way, also had not only a pygmy Homo, but a pygmy elephant that only went extinct much more recently than Homo floresiensis. So that was a dramatic find about the diversity of our hominid family. So now let me try to figure this out. How I get started here. Okay, let me try this. Is this? Oh, okay. And then let's see if I go back. Did it come back? Okay, there we go. Okay, so, okay, now I see. And now go from left to right. Okay, there we are. And so if you look at the classification of the mammals, going all the way from the lemur, for example, on one end, across to the so-called perhaps more advanced and also later to evolve, because we have time radiating out from the circle. And the earliest ones are those small mammals that started out almost at the beginning of the tertiary period, about 58 or 60 million years ago. And you see the last ones to kind of radiate out of all the animals on the right. And very specifically, the apes, which we would classify as pongids, and hominids. I always object to the fact that we refer to that as man, because more than half of us are not men. Those two together form a superfamily called the hominoids. And the part that occupy whatever species there are, and we now have at least 16, that ended up in Homo sapiens. And if you ever wonder, Homo sapiens across the globe is notably small range of the genome across all of Homo sapiens, more than in typically, I would say, most species. So we're all very, not very far apart from each other. And it suggests to some people that there may have been a bottleneck in the evolution of Homo sapiens. And fairly recently, say maybe 80,000 years ago or so, or perhaps even less than that, that was a crisis that caused us to have a very small population that it then has radiated out in terms of the genome to who we are today. That would include of all different minor aspects like our skin color and so on. Let me also just say this. We have about 18 different species over a time period of about, it's going back a little bit older with time, really going back to, say, 4 million years ago. As we stretch a little below, we see some of the intermediate species, maybe as far back as 4.5 million years ago. But we'll be talking about Lucy species. And Lucy species is not Homo, Australopithecus, which is earlier in the line of evolution, but on the line of evolution of the hominids, the characteristic of the hominids is, for the most of their history, the ability to walk upright. And that first place, enormous number of changes have to have happened. And Lucy's species lasted over, well, let's say nearly exactly about 1 million years, which is one of the longest. I'm not sure there is another that has lasted as long as Lucy. So, among other things, it was a successful invention. And the word invention, I don't mean to use it that way, but the evidence is that the ability to walk upright, in fact, the frontier for finding that out, is to go back before 4 million years ago when we see the first, or maybe 3.8 million years ago, the first Australopithecus afarensis. And she's called Australopithecus afarensis because I forgot what you would call that, not the superfamily, but the family before we have Homo as a genus. So the genus, Australopithecus, goes back to 3.4 million years with Lucy, and possibly really 3.6 considering other areas, and comes up to about 2.8 or so million years, a little bit less than that. And so here is that phylogeny tree. And let's see, I do have a pointer here somewhere, yes. Is this how they go do it? Okay, so here is Australopithecus afarensis. And we have just relatively little of an intermediate older species. For example, this species, finally we have found a skull of Anamensis, Australopithecus anamensis. And this is about, goes back almost to say 3.8 million years ago. And among other things, the skull of Anamensis has a bigger, very prominent cranial crest here, to which larger jaw muscles would have been attached as they were in Lucy's relatively subdued cranial crest. And so Anamensis would have been an animal that required a strong bite, and being similar to Lucy, we would judge probably also eating roots and things like that. There's no suggestion that we have that they were carnivores. And then if we go back further than that, the Anamensis, which is so similar to Lucy, but does have distinct differences, also in the dentition. Then we come back to greater than 4 million years, 4.2 or so, Ardipithecus. no longer Australopithecus. It's so different. It's not so different, but it's different enough to recognize that it's a different genus. It's Ardipithecus ramidus. And among the things about Australopithecus, Ardipithecus ramidus, it was found south of Hadar. And we will be talking about how special Hadar is. It was, I don't know, what would you call it? The Goldilocks of a place for the preservation of so many hominid fossils. And the hominids are very rare compared to all the other animals. There are lots of fossils of lots of vertebrate animals, elephants and such, at Hadar. So it was prone to preserving, it had the right sort of characteristic to preserve vertebrate fossils. And the vertebrate fossils were flush there, including the hominids, but relatively flush, still extremely rare compared to all the other animals, especially all the antelopes and other bovid animals like that. And then look, Afarensis lasts all the way here, virtually about a million years, before we get the next species, which was common in South Africa, and we don't see it in North Africa, Africanus. And Africanus is one of the first ancient hominids found in Africa. Darwin having suggested in the 1830s or so that we will find the origins of the early forebearers of the evolution of Homo sapiens in Africa. And so the Africanus is found in cave deposits in South Africa, in which lime from the caves is encased the fossils and protected them there and preserved them there. But Africanus is evolved from Afarensis, but without much more cranial capacity. So we're talking about 400 or so cc's, all the way up to Africanus. And then we gradually go up, and one of the things that starts to happen is that the brain case gets larger and larger. Homo ergaster, antecessor probably is what would be better, but Homo antecessor, no, this is Heidelbergensis. By the time we get to Heidelbergensis, which is about 400,000 years ago, we're getting a lot closer to Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis. And Heidelbergensis was also present in Africa and Europe. It's called Homo rhodesiensis, but it's about the same as Heidelbergensis, and many think they're the same. But in Europe, Heidelbergensis was in Europe, and the chief curator, Bob Ferenac, who's such a whiz at all of vertebrate paleontology, but particularly also the hominids, has worked at a site in Spain where in one particular place we have the remains in a cave of about 24 adults in various stages of preservation, with a lot of cave bears as well in those caves. And how those two animals interacted, it would be interesting to know, and hasn't been figured out. Homo heidelbergensis is the forerunner species that led in Europe to Neanderthalensis, but Rhodesiensis in Africa, same species as far as we know, or closely, evolved into Homo sapiens, for sure, in Africa. And the earliest Homo sapiens is about 150,000 years ago, though some people are trying to press more scrappy evidence for it even being older than that. And that's the beginning of this, with about 1,500 cc's of cranial capacity, but Neanderthalensis had a bigger cranial capacity, more like 1,700 cc's. But of course, the structure of the brain is also important. It's not just the volume. So but the main thing here is I want you to know that the Lucy species is very long-lasting in East Africa, in Northeast Africa, of about 1 million years. Now I have to figure this back out again. Okay, and this, you can hardly make him out, but this is Don Johansson with long sideburns, and he was about 28 and I was about 32, for example. 50 years ago, literally this is 50 years ago and 10 days. No, not 10 days. 50 years ago and 2 weeks after Lucy's first bone was found. And I'll show you the circumstances when we get into the slides a little more. And because of mirror imaging, again, we don't have both femurs, but we have this femur, we have this tibia, we have a knee joint as a result. And it turns out the knee joint is very telling, but the nature of the pelvis is telling, and the evidence is, and notice that we don't have the lower limbs. And and here are the parts that make up our model that we have down below. Just so happens that the season of 1974 was very productive. And Don is handling some of the hominid fossils that were found as scrappy pieces, but still very important pieces of maxilla and mandible and various parts of maybe the humerus and so on. These are the kind of things that would have been a treasure trove to find that amount of material in one season, as it was, along with the treasure trove of all that's lasted so long. But then the next season after, so this was 1974, 1975, and 1976, another site was found that was just as remarkable. And that's locality 333. And Lucy is locality 288. And some of these might be going back to 129 or something like that. And we eventually got up to about, let's see, maybe 300 or something like that of localities. But the two most famous localities still are locality 288, where Lucy was found, and locality 333, 1944, excuse me, 1975 and 6, locality 333. There were remains of approximately, 13 to 14 or 15 individuals, but only the partial remains, so that we have maybe a total of, I think, 300 individual fossil pieces from locality 333. And unlike Lucy, it took us a while to figure out more about how things came together, because almost all of those pieces were found along a slope. They had weathered out of strata that had, it turns out, one stratum we now know, that had weathered away, and probably over a fairly big area, an area maybe, well, all the hominids are found about in the central area of our seating, on a slope, just like all you people. And maybe just a little bigger than that, maybe actually containing two of these. But that had weathered out and remained on the slope because they were heavier and more sturdy than the clay and sand particles that were also weathering with them and had been encasing them. And one of the things that we'll talk about today is the telltale evidence that the fossils give us, especially at 333, but by chance, and it's slightly in preparation for this talk, that caused me to have to go and see if I actually saved something. Because all this work was done out of Cleveland, out of the Case Western Reserve University Geology Department, which included me and Don, but he was in anthropology. But he had a joint appointment at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, which is one of the fine natural history museums in the country, along with so many, including especially here. When Lucy was found, Ethiopia has a ministry of culture under which things like finding antiquities fell, mostly artifacts and things like that, but including also the starting to collect and house and have the formal duty of housing the fossils of early hominids, but starting out with what was happening at Hadar. I hope I mentioned the name of the site, which is Hadar. Okay, so now if we look at Lucy, and we also take the material, which includes a whole foot from locality 333, for example, under special situation, the way those fossils were preserved, and I hope to show you that. And other bones that complement the ones that are missing from Lucy. But critical here, we had a knee joint, and that was telltale to tell us that Lucy stood upright. And we had no idea, not no idea, but almost no idea about how old these fossils were. And that, turns out, was my job. Not just my job, but my job and then my continuing on with my students, some of whom could do much better job of dating with even more modern equipment than we had at Case Western, which was still plenty good. Okay, so then let's see there. So the most important biomechanics professor of paleoanthropology is a guy by the name of Owen. He's got a nice last name, Lovejoy. And he's a funny guy. For example, he's afraid of flying. So he's never been to Hadar. And he always said to Don Johansson, because he was at Kent State, and I don't know, you know your Ohio geography, but Kent State, Kent is along the same river is Cleveland, which is the Cuyahoga River, which is a very small river draining into Lake Erie. And many of you have heard of Kent State for many reasons, especially during the Vietnam War. Owen Lovejoy is just, nobody questions that he is the best. In fact, that's his PhD, was in that area at Department of biomedical medical program. He got his PhD in that program at Case Western Reserve University before being at Kent. And so what you see here is everything that is in the darker color are the fossils that were found of Lucy. And the others have filled in to make those joints where material is missing. And you can see that there's not much bone for the skull as we've looked at here. And all of this construction, notice we have a little bit. We have the tibia joint, and we have a little bit joining to the ankle, and so on. All these things, Owen Lovejoy could work together and cause them to fit. He could look at the way ligaments were joined to the bones from their fossil scars, and he worked out what Lucy looked like. And he has a big panorama of individual Lucys that he's made that are walking, just like this. So you have a Lucy, several copies of a really well-made Lucy that are walking like that. But on a lark, he made this one. Just rearrange the joints that are in ways that how they would be. And this is, you can imagine, is Lucy running. And he said, and he's from his analyses, that Lucy could run just as well as she could walk, and she could run and walk just as well as we can. And from the material that you're seeing here, which he rearranged to make it a walking. And so you see this young lady who is about the same size as Lucy, who we mentioned, but instead of she weighs about 38 pounds, and Lucy, from the ruggedness of her bones and so on, it was said to have weighed about 20 pounds more than Avi. And Avi happens to be my daughter. And she's now 24. She's now 20. How many? Oh, no, she's older than that. Okay. Okay, but now, excuse me, I'm used to, this one back? Yes, this is it. Yeah, okay, here. What does a geologist do? Well, a geologist asks rocks questions like, how old are you? Or if we're looking at the sediment that encases Lucy, rock, how did you form? And when Lucy was found, most of the bones, which are littered along a slope that was coming from an outcrop just above her, and we'll see that picture, that most of the bones were completely free. So that's why Don was able to collect them, and he had a graduate student who was with him when he found them. First bones, I think it was an elbow joint, if I recall, of Lucy, Tom Gray. And so Tom and he together found all of the parts of Lucy, but it was not, as I say, unheard of in 2 weeks' time. And I think it was probably more like 1 week's time. And guess what? Don pieced together the skeleton that we will see in a matter of a week. It's unheard of. And it was striking. And then further striking is the Ministry of Culture in Ethiopia allowed Don to pack up in I'm talking about a small suitcase like this, and take Lucy's skeleton all the way to Cleveland for 5 years, to study. And today that's completely unheard of, and Lucy's skeleton's so important, and anybody who studies Lucy goes to Ethiopia and more or less under lock and key can stay with Lucy and study her. So anyway, we're going to answer some of those questions. This is the only picture I have of me in the field. And this is Don Johansson. And this is Maurice Tayeb. Oh my God, I wasn't even talking about Maurice. And Maurice, sadly, is the only of us three, of which there were a total of only 7 of us who were in the team. I always remember it as more than that. No, it was like 20 of us, wasn't there? And that is because after the first family was found, in 1976, the final recovery of all we could find from 333, we couldn't get back to Ethiopia because of political turmoil all across Ethiopia, especially in the Afar. We couldn't get back for 15 years. And I completely transformed my career. Didn't completely transform it. I continued to do dating, but I got so intrigued that I re-washed myself, so to speak. I realized how little I knew how to interpret sediments and their environments. And I said, I'm going to, because I raised all these questions of what I didn't know, which was enormous. So I used that break of 15 years to transform myself into a sedimentologist, to look at sediments and to work out their meanings. And even, I think, make some original deductions, especially with respect to Lucy and the site of Hadar. And so, for example, we had a brand new professor, Bob D'Amico, who influenced my life. I don't think he knows that. I've got to let him know. He only was at CWRU, Case Western, for 2 or 3 years, and he ended up joining his wife at SUNY Binghamton, I think. Yes, SUNY Binghamton. And I haven't actually kept up with Bob that much. I need to reconnect with him for old time's sakes. But I took his course, and he was being trained in a brand new area of sedimentology called doing facies models, which were looking at sub-environments that are represented by the sediments and their character. And then trying to see how these sub-environments interacted with each other. And to recognize that in a sedimentary basin like Hadar was, where sediments were accumulating, because the Earth was subsiding, because the Earth was being stretched, as we'll see, by the tectonics of Africa. That in a sedimentary basin, you can work out the environment of the total environment of a part of the basin, maybe not the whole basin, but a part of the basin, which might be bigger than this museum by a factor of 10, say, something like that, the whole museum, a bit bigger than that even, by looking at sub-environments and imagining that those sub-environments, if you can measure across time so they're about the same age, or walk them out and see their transitions from one to another, you can work out all the sub-environments. And that's what I learned from Bob D'Amico and his professors by reading their books. And when I finally came back to Ethiopia, which we all did after 15 years in the year 2000, the year 1990, and I continued to work in Ethiopia, applying all that I learned to work out the environments of deposition, and to continue with doing geochronology. But my students were getting better at that than I, with their better machinery than I had. Okay, so let's go. Okay, so here's how we determine the age, which turns out to be important. And here's the stratigraphic column we talk about for Hadar. And you can trace these layers out. It sounds easy to do because some pinch out and come back and so on across the area. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 volcanic horizons that ultimately we've been able to date. You cannot date sediments themselves because they're made up of particles that are pre-existing rocks. We cannot date the bones at all, going way back like that. You can do some dating of bones with uranium, thorium, but the bones get too transformed, petrified in the petrification process. We have to date the volcanic layers that interlayer, and this is a volcanically active region, very so, much so. And therefore we bracket the sequence of ages. And we divided the sedimentary column into members, and we put boundaries where there are important volcanic ashes. And the ash is somewhat, not really, very much petrified. And so those are called tuffs, whether they're lithified or not. Sort of ancient volcanic ashes that blew out of a volcano, sometimes horrendously, over a long, long distance in East Africa where there are lots of big volcanoes, not just Kilimanjaro. So using this technique of potassium-argon dating, and this is my system, unfortunately. In fact, the system is now being preserved as a museum piece actually at Dartmouth. And it's going to be in display in a central hallway that radiates out to the different sciences, including geology. And so everything is on one tabletop. But what we do is we load up a sample and close it off again in a very high vacuum system, which has connecting parts to it. But let me just try to explain it to let you know. And so in it, we have a very thin molybdenum crucible on the inside of the vacuum system. And I'll bet you there's at least 1 or 2 engineers or so in the audience who perhaps have had experience, or mechanics or so on, with induction heating, in which you have a coil of copper that you are attached to what's called an induction furnace, which is just a generator of a very high current that circles through these coils. But these coils are coils that are hollow. And so they're relatively easily to form into these coils from a great length of this kind of copper. And the reason the coils are hollow is because the coils themselves would melt unless you force a lot of water through here while that high current is going. And so it's an expensive process in terms of water use. And you can feel the heat in the water that's coming out, but you have a big flow of water that is doing this. So that allows you to induce a current in this thin molybdenum crucible. Molybdenum has a very high melting point, something like 2,500 degrees centigrade, or 20, yeah, something like that. Not quite as high as tungsten, which you can make it used to be in an old light bulb, to very high temperatures without melting, and produce light inefficiently compared to what we do today. So here, you're just seeing the intense heat that is radiating out. Those are not samples or anything like that. We don't heat it up so hot that we explosively heat it up. At the end of the day, when we take this crucible out after we've extracted the argon that's been accumulated from the decay of the potassium, and it's potassium-40 ticking away with a half-life of 1.25, more accurately, billion years. So it's a very slow decay rate. And furthermore, potassium-40 is a rare isotope of a common element in minerals like potassium feldspar or some mica minerals, for example. And over time, let me just say, even though argon is a noble element, which means that it's kind of loose inside the crystal once it's been produced by radioactive decay, there are certain minerals where the potassium is in a cage of other surrounding atoms. In the micas, for example, if you've ever seen a mica, you can peel it. We used to use it, not me, we ancient humans, more ancient beings, used to make windows out of big sheets of mica, which were mined, sometimes with mica crystals like this. And you peel them off with a thickness like this and a big mica crystal. And so, for example, the Navajo Indians in their Navajo buildings would trade for such mica to have windows to those buildings back in the 19th century. One mica is an outstanding clock for potassium argon work. It's one of our best clocks, doesn't lose argon even when heated up considerably in natural causes, which we can test. Next to a contact with a granite, it doesn't show the evidence of losing any argon. And another very good mineral is a feldspar that only occurs in volcanic rocks, a potassium feldspar in volcanic rocks. It's slightly different in plutonic rocks, that is deep-seated rocks like granite. And the granitic K feldspar is not a good clock, loses argon. I can tell you why, but it takes me a while. But the sanidine does not have that property. It's in volcanic rocks. It's common in volcanic rocks. These kind we call rhyolite. And it's an excellent clock too, perhaps even better than the muscovite. Right. So anyway, there are these clocks. And so potassium ticks away, and you can see a little bit of a gas color here. That is, this is a little nitrogen that you can't quite get away with. And, but to be honest with you, I doctored this experiment for the photograph by putting in that nitrogen, which is a very trace amount of nitrogen. Because when we do the vacuuming of having the loaded sample, why do we have to do this in a vacuum? Well, of course, we have to contain the gas that comes off. But this is a very hard thing to do. And that is because, take a deep breath. Guess what the third most abundant gas in our atmosphere is? It is nitrogen, oxygen, argon. Argon is the third most abundant gas in our atmosphere. 1%. It's so far away from the oxygen, which is 20%, and farther away from the nitrogen, which is 78%. But we have to do this experiment in a sea of atmospheric argon. So we have to have very powerful vacuum system all underneath this table that creates the vacuum. It allows us to extract the argon. And then in order to run it in the mass spectrometer, there are all kinds of other gases that are given off that are part of the mineral, like water vapor, water of crystallization and so on. We have to purify that. We do that with hot titanium in the vacuum system. All this in the vacuum system. And then we have polishing techniques to get the lowest, the highest purity of the argon. Furthermore, to the argon, we add a special isotope of argon that is really rare in nature, but was purified, and I spent $1,000 to get enough to last me the life of this system, of argon-38. And we use that argon-38 as an internal isotope standard of how many molecules. So what we end up having is the argon isotope that's most common in air, which is argon-36, argon-38, which is the tracer we add, and argon-40, which is the radiogenic argon-40 plus any atmospheric argon, which you always have some, and sometimes more than some, that you couldn't get rid of. But we can trace what of that argon-40 we do not count, because we see the argon-36 and the atmospheric composition of the argon and the air is very fixed and well mixed. And we measure the argon-36. It traces what part of the argon-40 has come from the atmosphere. And the rest of the argon-40 is the radiogenic argon produced by the decay of potassium. It sounds complicated, but it's, we've done so many tests, not just we, many labs, to show that it's a great method for dating rocks. Okay, so that's how we do that. And if I go back just a little bit, our best dated units are right here at the, right at the, where is it? Oh, here, I'm sorry. It's right up here at the top. So we're just a little bit off. And it is been very reliably dated. It is feldspar, a tuff that is very rich in potassium feldspar, so that I can have enough to be able to date reliably. And this is maybe just a second. Yeah, I need to see that number myself. 2.95 million years. Yes, that's what it is. So the top of the formation, then we go to another formation above that, which is not nearly as fossiliferous as this Hadar formation. So the very top of the formation is defined by that tuff right there. 2.95 million years. Let's say, for our purposes here, 3 million, but and we also have the tuff at the very bottom of the formation, which was not datable by my technique, which is shown here in yellow. And this is a tuff that was almost entirely volcanic glass that blew up as bubbles of pumice in a very big eruption, biggest eruption we have in our record here, from far away. And, but it had very trace amounts of potassium feldspar. And my student became an expert in this dating called argon-argon dating, and in which you can date very small amount. You can date individual feldspar crystals. I could never do that. There's a technique complex, but has many advantages. And then you can date a very small amount if you have a very expensive mass spectrometer, like one that costs at least $500,000 compared to mine that costs $7,000. And which was thought not to be able to be used for this, but I showed it did. And then we just go up through the record. Here is a tuff we might see pictures of, which is 3.22 million years. Okay, let's go ahead. Okay, so Hadar is lots of fossils. I mean, relatively lots. They're still hard to find. But this is a whole baby elephant in lakeshore muds. These lakeshore muds, we can tell they're lakeshore muds because they're laminated, slow settling with fish bones and that sort of thing. And so this is an elephant that waded out a little too far in the, and it's a baby elephant, into the lake, which was at the eastern edge of Hadar. In the middle of Hadar, and occupying most of Hadar, is sediments that were a meandering river floodplain sediments. And those are where the Hadar has the most fossil animals, including the hominids, in those sediments. So let's keep going. Oops, I keep wanting to do like the old days. Okay, now look where we are. You see, oh my God. So this is where Hadar is. You see this triangle? And it stands out on, I think this is a doctored, but one of the images of the whole Earth from the moon. And it actually may not be doctored. And this funnels down here. You can see that. And so this is seen from the moon, basically. This is the picture from Apollo 17. And only, I think, by chance, because the timing was such that the Earth was full when the moon was, for us, a new moon. And so that was a modestly uncommon situation. And just as the astronauts were leaving the moon, the orbiter had picked up, the orbiter had picked up the people who had landed. And the person, one of the persons who was on that was the only geologist, Aronson. He actually went to Caltech, same place I did, but he was an undergraduate from Caltech. And they took this fabulous picture of the Earth, which is now, you see it often, but that it focused on Africa and focused just pretty much right in the center, not quite, could be down there, but of the Afar, one of the most amazing features on Earth, which is a triple junction in terms of plate tectonics, which we actually was just in '74, we were just learning about plate tectonics. And there are 3 rifts: the Red Sea Rift, and the Gulf of Aden Rift, and notice the 128 degree, 120, and the East African Rift. And this is the East African Rift Valley where so many hominids, so many, have been found. Those 3 intersect in what's called a stable triple junction, in which everything radiates away from it. So here's Arabia from Africa, Arabia from the Horn of Africa, and this rift here is sometimes referred to as possibly a failed rift, which would have broken off a large chunk of Africa to make a small island. But the future of the East African Rift is still not understood as to whether it's in a dormant stage of a few million years or it's so on. But anyway, Hadar is right in the center, right there in the center. And flowing into Hadar from the high areas of the rift over here, I'm sorry. I think I'm wearing out the pointer. But anyway, is a river which shares a divide with the Nile, which is the major tributary that provides most of the water to the Nile. The Nile's one of the longest rivers, probably the longest, not quite, river on Earth, but it gets 90% of its water from this one branch that comes with off the Ethiopian plateau, where the plateaus get high rainfall in the rainy season, very high. And sharing that divide is a river that flows into the East African Rift and then out, into the center. I don't think I can do much more with that. So, so the Awash is a pretty important river, but guess what? The river never reaches the sea because this triangular depression is extremely hot and dry, and so it ends up in right in the very center as a lake that is very saline and small, and that essentially is the evaporation rate equals the rate of water coming in. And this is what the East African Rift Valley looks like. We're actually going to not be able to go too much longer, and here is a lake, and here are rivers coming in with their sedimentary features, and here are the highlands that are providing the sediment that is eroding into there. And here are these wonderful environments where animals of all sorts, including, of course, hominids today, but in the past probably. And that's why Louis Leakey and Mary Leakey and Richard Leakey and other Leakeys started working at Olduvai Gorge, which is not too far from here, in the East African Rift Valley, on the shoulder of the Rift Valley in a marginal rift. So you see that the environments are hung together. And so each of these are sub-environments. And the same sub-environments exist in Hadar, in which there was a lake, in just this sitting, if we were looking to the north, of a lake on the east and a plain in which you had rivers coming in, but in our case, a major river, the ancestral Awash River. And from time to time, varies with subsidence rate and so on. These environments shift across each other. Maybe the climate changes a little bit and the lake expands and transgresses and deposits lake sediments on top of fluvial sediments. That's the kind of environment that existed in Hadar. Okay. Just to point out just a little bit here, this is my student Bob Walter, who did so many good things at Hadar. This is how much you sweat just sitting there with your pack on. And you can only carry, I only could carry a gallon of water for an all day out in 115-degree weather, 110 anyway. And so you really had to nourish your water. I think Bob could carry 2 of those gallons. Yeah, it looks like he's got 2. So you had to parcel your water out. But anyway, here's what the sediments look like. It's a Badlands topography. But I just point out that across the river here, in white, is the lower tuff that I said was the biggest tuff, which is it's called the SHT. Some people get funny ideas of what that stands for, but it's City Hakoma, which is one of the wadis where that tuff is so well exposed it was very early on. And it's for its first geographic discoveries. Tuff. So SHT is the City Hakoma tuff, which is 3.40 million years. And that precise age is due to Bob Walter, who did dating of those very few feldspars. But I did separation of the feldspars for it, which was very arduous to find a few of these glass shards. Remember, it's nearly entirely a glass ash of glass bubbles that blew apart in a very big eruption. They went way out into the Indian Ocean where it's been cored, and across East Africa to the sites where Leakey were working and where we are working here. Finally, we realized that this was all one eruption, like chemical fingerprinting the glass, which it turns out if you look at enough elements. Just out in the distance is the only basalt flow we have, which is quite resistant to erosion. And we originally thought it was high in the sequence, but no, it turns out it's low in the sequence.
Dr. Aronson, what did it feel like to have that discovery? What was the emotion?
We heard a lot of the Beatles singing. People were playing it extremely loudly. And so we would go out and people would be dropped off at various areas they wanted to explore. And one of the things you had to be careful of is not getting lost in the Badlands, because you go up one gully and you can end up going and making maybe a few moves to go to the next gully. But just head down and you'll come to the major gully. And one of those would be, for example, the City Hakoma.
Hey, Dr. Aronson?
Yeah.
Could you just speak into the mic?
Oh, sure. Oh,
you so
yeah,
much.
excuse me. So, but yeah, we were elated. I have a picture here of Maurice and Don, and you can see Maurice is so happy. He was the most generous person you could ever imagine to have discovered this area. Don met Maurice and heard him speak at a conference in East Africa about his work on trying to find sites with vertebrate fossils along the Awash River all the way into the Afar. And so he was an amazing pioneer who did his PhD pretty much singly himself on a very long stretch of very remote, it's a very remote area. But there was a road going through there, though, to a port in Djibouti, which is on the Red Sea. And so Don said, do you have any sites that you think have a lot of fossils in them? And Maury said, yeah, I have several. I can think of 3. And Don and he went out and explored along the Awash River the sediments, very cursorily. And one stood out, and that was Hadar, as having more fossils that they could readily see. And so, and parts of fossils and so on. And this is all with being in the field 3 or 4 days at each site, if that long. And so they picked Hadar. And Hadar did turn out and stands today as being unique, uniquely special. And it's not just Hadar, it's just one segment of Hadar, where this interaction between the lake coming in from the central Afar and the river coming in from the East African Rift and their interaction. It just was a place that was animals liked. And it was subsiding and preserving them extremely well. So,
other questions?
Where is Lucy at this point? Where can we see Lucy? We will have to go all the way to Africa to see her?
I can't see where you are, but that's a good question.
Over here.
Okay.
Hi.
And
Okay.
the way you see Lucy is like this. But thanks to the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, just like the State Museum here in Albany. What Don did, because he could see the writing on the wall, he had a 5-year contract to have Lucy, which was so amazingly generous by hindsight, foresight, no, hindsight, that what was possible. And so Owen Lovejoy was there. It's so close by. It was, it was like magic. And everybody young and enthusiastic. But the museum in Cleveland actually possibly got funding for this. But they hired a very special person. I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, but he was a young person who was a clay modeler, an artist kind of person, to set up a casting lab to do the highest quality casting of all of the Lucy bones that we had. And I think, let's say at least 500 casts might have been made, but let me say that's probably overdone it. Probably 200. Maybe 200 casts were made and sold at a modest cost, not a profit-making cost, but maybe for maybe $500 to $1,000, something like that. And those, I don't know, for example, they have one at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. They have one at the American Museum of Natural History. I bet you Carnegie probably has one. And look what we have. This is good enough. I'm impressed.
Jim,
so where is Lucy? She's at the museum, the Ministry of Culture, which has like a museum. It's more of a storage area, somewhat similar to what we see here. With Bob this morning. It's very professionally done, and they're training people there as well. And several amazing Ethiopian scientists who were trained in our expedition and in Tim White's expedition to other parts of the Afar, all the way up to PhD level across the board. And the director of physical anthropology at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History was Haile Selassie, not the Haile Selassie, I'm sorry, I forgot Haile Selassie's last name. And he is now the head of the Institute of Human Origins, which Don formed at Arizona State University. But he used to be the director of physical anthropology at the Museum of Natural History. Anyway, all across the world have these casts. So if you get a chance to go to any of those museums I mentioned, especially like the American Museum of Natural History in New York, you'll see that.
Hey, Jim, look,
Yeah.
over here. So we'll have one more official question, and then if you want to stick around, I think we can do more questions after that.
Yeah.
Does anyone have one more question?
Yes, there's so many people.
No, wait.
Oh,
Yeah.
where was it going? Oh, yeah, okay, sorry.
Doctor, what happened in 1990? You went back to Hadar. Did you use that potassium-argon dating at that point? And then the second question is, what was the specific clay mineral that you used in that dating, if you indeed used it when you returned?
Well, so the answer is, when we look at my system and the dating that it's done, where it pioneered, I'm amazed you talked about clay minerals.
Dr. Aronson, could you
Oh,
talk to the
I'm
microphone?
sorry. Yes. But there is one clay mineral, which is called illite. And illite, when is formed at the end of a burial process. When rocks are buried, they undergo transformations because it gets hotter, about 30 degrees per kilometer, as you go down in the earth. And if you have, like the Rocky Mountains, let me put Lucy down. If you have the Rocky Mountains over here, excuse me, if you have the Rocky Mountains over here, there are sediments that are Cretaceous in age, about 100 to 120 million years, with many volcanic ashes at a time when the western U.S. was very volcanically active, erupting into a sea. And the ash, when it is deposited in the sea, the ash is volcanic glass, bubbles, walls of the bubbles, little tiny bubbles that blow up in an explosive eruption, which is very common. Like St. Helens, for example, did that. That glass is very reactive in seawater because it's very thin walled. I mean, not microns, but half a millimeter, or more, less than half a tenth of a millimeter above the walls. And that ash, glass ash in seawater changes to clay, weathers to clay. When it's being deposited, unless it's buried fast, that glass won't be preserved. And it forms a clay called smectite, which when buried further, and the sediments are being heated up, but not that hot, around a little bit above, below, a little bit higher, hotter and deeper than, say, 120 degrees centigrade, boiling point of water, a little bit more. That smectite undergoes a transformation because the opportunity as well is potassium feldspar grains, which are mixed in with the clay sediment, is silt grains, and quartz is very common, but the quartz is chemically inactive. But the K feldspar disintegrates very easily and provides potassium, which is picked up by the smectite, which undergoes a smooth transition with depth more and more of those two reactions going together to become illite. And so we can date that process of burial, especially if it takes place fairly suddenly. Then that date is a date for the time when this got hotter for some reason. One of the places we tested this out is where granite intrusions come in and intruded these Cretaceous sediments and caused these smectite volcanic layers to transform to illite smectite as you approach the contact with this hot intrusion. But in any case, where we used it most marvelously is in the Rocky Mountains. These Rocky Mountains have all been thrusted up over this once Cretaceous seaway and caused underneath these thrusts, which are faults, underneath those to be buried quickly to great depths because of tectonic burial. And so we have dated the uplift of many of these mountain uplifts, these thrusted mountain uplifts, by dating the smectite from underneath, sometimes from drill core, but often from just outcrop data where the thrust has been thrust up, eroded back, and exposed these that were once thrusted over, and date that thrusting. So that's part of the, petroleum geologists are very interested in this and supported a lot of my work, especially Marathon Oil Company. In fact, Marathon Oil Company gave me, when I first came to Case Western Reserve University in 1970, $25,000 to build my potassium argon system to do dating on illite smectite. Because this transformation of smectite to illite is about the same place where organic matter transforms to petroleum. So they can go to a sedimentary basin and see if the illite there, if the smectite there has transformed to illite smectite, and then when did it happen? And how does that fit in with all the other things that have to go on to generate a petroleum deposit, including the proper structure, deformation, and so on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.